After having played No Man's Sky a lot, as well as a little game called Rodina, which was developed by one person, I've come to the conclusion that perhaps No Man's Sky isn't quite as technologically advanced as it would have you believe. The game, at least in some part, was sold on the promise and wonder of having an entire universe to explore that is literally as large as our own real-life universe, which is something that hasn't ever really been done, at least on the surface. For the sake of this argument, let's simply ignore the controversy behind the game's missing features and lack of content, and just focus completely on the technology behind No Man's Sky's enormous universe. Let's break this down into a few segments first. What are the components that make up this massive universe? We have procedural generation, the lack of loading zones, and an immense universe-sized scale. All of these three things together are what make up the universe of No Man's Sky, with a little bit of help from very discrete static bits such as buildings, space stations, NPCs, and the various components that make up all of the procedurally generated animals and plants. Before I make my case, let's elaborate on each aspect just a little bit more. Procedural generation is an incredibly useful tool for game developers to have in their arsenal. It allows them to quickly create a large amount of playable space with a minimal amount of effort. This can, of course, be done in different ways, such as No Man's Sky's or Minecraft's approach, where nearly everything is generated, or something more like The Binding of Isaac or Diablo, where handcrafted chunks are pasted together to create a unique map, but with the recognizable bits. Another great thing about procedural generation is that it isn't truly random, and is often predictable and reproducible. Procedural generation algorithms generate based on a seed value, which, with the same seed value for a given generation, will produce the exact same configuration every time. This is the same kind of magic that The Binding of Isaac Rebirth uses to allow players to play the same map on different machines. The past decade or so has seen loading zones become less popular and accepted as worlds got bigger. Even as early as 2004, where the World of Warcraft made the outside areas of each continent completely contiguous, and 2006, where Oblivion's world map at least attempted to make sure you never had to load. This is a technology called level streaming that more and more games are using. The general idea is that as you move around a large area, that area is logically divided into chunks and loaded while you play when you meet certain conditions. There's a few ways to accomplish this. One way is to have all of these chunks around the area that you're currently occupying be loaded, loading and unloading as you enter different chunks. Another way that has been around much longer is to hide the loading with a hallway or connecting building, which is what the original Pokemon games did, or to make doors slow to open until the room on the other side is completely loaded, which is how it's done in Metroid Prime. Of course, slow doors and loading hallways aren't necessarily the same as a lack of loading zone. It gives you that illusion and never takes control away from you. For the chunk style, the amount of what's loaded can be scaled up more by using something called level of detail, where less detailed models and textures are loaded the further away they are from you to allow more stuff to be on the screen at the same time without putting too much strain on your hardware. No Man's Sky pretty effectively uses all of these methods that I mentioned to pretty good effect. The immense scale of No Man's Sky is perhaps one of the trickier bits to solve, but it's absolutely not impossible. Games like Clicker Heroes and Cookie Clicker show us that it's not too difficult to find a way around the maximum value of a 32 or 64-bit integer, if that's even a problem in this case. In fact, I'm not entirely convinced that each galaxy in No Man's Sky is so large that it overflows these primitive data types. And if you're a bit confused by my use of technical jargon here, all I'm saying is that it's no technological leap to implement a galaxy or universe in the way that No Man's Sky has. And here's where I start stringing all of this together. First, individual galaxies are pretty easy to represent. There aren't nearly as many of them as there are stars, so these can be considered our top level of generation. Each galaxy can be its own level, and for each galaxy we procedurally generate a different star map using the unique ID of the galaxy as a seed. These levels are probably able to be held in memory or, at the very least, loaded and streamed extremely quickly due to their relative simplicity. I mean, it's literally just a bunch of pretty dots and a minor amount of volumetric effects that make up the whole galaxy map. Each star may be represented by a three-dimensional coordinate in X, Y, and Z. Given that you start at around 180,000 light-years away from the center of the galaxy, we can assume that the overall size of the galaxy isn't much larger than that, and that's well below any amount of overflow for a simple fixed point type. The reason this can work as simply as I'm saying that it does is because each star can be considered its own unique map. I mentioned earlier that No Man's Sky uses multiple types of level streaming, and the way you get from star to star is by using that loading hallway style as you warp from star to star. But how is each star system generated? Well, think back to the procedural generation in my explanation of seeds. Each system can be generated by using the star's coordinates as a seed, along with the star's type, along with any other arbitrary number for each planet in the system. From there, you can generate each planet using known methods. Planetary scales are probably the trickiest bit here, but not insurmountable, as you can get clever with chunking or perhaps other methods that I haven't thought of. On top of all this, all you need is a healthy dose of level of detail implementation to make sure planets can be seen from anywhere, which really helps in driving home that immense sense of scale. As for the plants and animals and ships, they're just spliced together from various bits that have already been created by artists. This type of torso with this head and these legs, with this color and this temperament. Hopefully all this long-winded explanation was easy enough to understand and shows that not even the scale of No Man's Sky is particularly impressive. I'm not going to sit here and say that it doesn't take at least some level of talent and cleverness to implement these things, but an explorable area that's literally the size of a universe isn't really as big of a technical leap as it might seem from the surface. Perhaps the most impressive thing that No Man's Sky does is the algorithm that generates the planets. Even though there isn't much to do on these planets, I won't deny that the landscapes at least look very interesting and look very good at times, especially for being procedurally generated. The terrain is at least believable. Unfortunately though, as we now know, this isn't enough to make the game as a whole interesting. Perhaps a big reason why No Man's Sky is the first game to do this universe scale is because other developers probably realize that there isn't much of a point if there's no way to guarantee interesting or fun interactions from planet to planet without making things get stale or boring. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button on your way out. And if you haven't already, go follow me on Twitter at ingeniousclown and hit that subscribe button for more awesome gaming content here in the future, and I will see you next time.